I think I've told you this before, but my favorite all-time movie is It's a Wonderful Life. I know, it's old. I mean, it's even older than most of us in this room. That's how old it is. But I just love this tale. These days you can watch it around the holidays on just about every channel available, or you could borrow my DVD, or you could borrow my VHS tape. I'm telling you, I have loved this movie for a very long time. There's a scene in the beginning of the movie that always has stayed with me. Before we ever meet George Bailey, before the story really begins, the heavens are listening. And from all over Bedford Falls, voices begin rising up in prayer. One person prays for George because he's in trouble, and another because he's lost, and because he's afraid, and another because they just love him. The prayers overlap and they tumble into one another until heaven sounds less like a choir and more like what it really is. Humanity calling out from every direction all at once. Honestly, I've been thinking about that scene all week, because this week at St. James, we filled out our prayer doves for Pentecost. Prayers written and hung so that they fly over us over the altar. 160 doves. That's an all-time record for us. Some simply carry names, but others carry gratitude and fear and hope and confusion and gladness and heartbreak and wonder and grief. But the one thing they all seem to carry is love. And I cannot stop thinking about them. Because the thing about prayer is that it reveals who we really are. Not the polished version, not the version that we put on our resumes or put out in social media or even sometimes bring to church. Prayers reveal the trembling places. The places where we love so much it hurts. The places where we are afraid. The places where we cannot fix what is broken. The places where gratitude catches us by surprise. The places where we still dare to hope despite everything. And maybe that's why Pentecost matters so much. Because Pentecost is not the story of a polished people suddenly becoming even more impressive. It's the story of frightened and uncertain and ordinary people discovering that God's Spirit is moving through them anyway. You see, hanging above us this morning is something breathtakingly holy, the visible evidence of human beings still daring to pray. Pentecost can sometimes feel strange and distant. Tongues of fire and violent wind and people suddenly speaking language they don't know. But beneath all of that drama is something profoundly human. People trying to speak and people longing to be understood. Our reading from the Acts of the Apostles tells us that Jerusalem was crowded with people from everywhere, different languages, different cultures, different stories, and yet somehow, through the Spirit, every person heard the good news in their own language. Not one language imposed on everyone, not that everybody should be the same, but everybody gets the same good news. The miracle of Pentecost is not merely that the disciples spoke, it's that the human longing to be heard and to understand finally became clear. And the scriptures today remind us that this has apparently always been God's tendency. In the reading from Numbers, Moses is exhausted, overwhelmed, burdened by the impossible task of carrying his people through the wilderness. So God takes some of the Spirit resting on Moses, and he shares it among the 70 elders. But then something unexpected happens. 2 men, my 2 heroes, Eldad and Medad, begin prophesying out in the camp, even though they were not where they were supposed to be. Joshua is horrified. Someone stop them. Someone should control this. Someone needs to contain that spirit properly. And Moses said, would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord would put his spirit on them all. In other words, you think this is a problem? I think this is a dream. And maybe Pentecost is the moment that dream bursts open completely. The Spirit no longer resting on just prophets and kings and priests, no longer confined to certain people in certain places. Now the Spirit is poured out on everybody, young and old, women and men, servants and free, the ones in the room, the ones out in the camp, the ones with eloquent prayers, the ones who write a name on a prayer dove and trust that God understands the rest. And isn't that what prayer is? A human being saying, can anybody hear this? Can anybody hold this? Can anybody help? Some of the doves hanging above us contain prayers so tender they almost take your breath away. Prayers for children, prayers for healing, prayers written by people trying to hold on to hope with just their fingertips. Prayers for people who are carrying burdens silently and for far too long. Prayers of thanksgiving from people who know exactly how fragile joy can be. And some simply contain a name, which may be the deepest prayer of all, because sometimes words fail us. Sometimes all we can offer God is this person, or this situation, or this grief, or you know. And the Spirit intercedes even then. In today's gospel, Jesus stands up in the middle of a crowded festival and cries out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me." And I love that image because Jesus speaks as though thirst itself is not failure. Thirst is simply what it means to be human. We thirst for justice and for healing and for reconciliation and for peace and for meaning and for assurance that love is stronger than death, for hope that survives even the headlines. In short, we thirst for God. And Jesus does not shame that thirst. He welcomes it. He says, "Come." But then he says something astonishing. Out of believers' hearts shall flow rivers of living water. Not a trickle, not barely enough, rivers of living water. The Spirit does not merely comfort us privately so we can feel spiritually hydrated and self-contained. The Spirit flows through us and gushes outward to the world. Which means that sometimes the very people praying for strength become the source of strength for someone else. And the very people longing for hope become carriers of hope. The people crying out to God become the very evidence that God is still present among us. 104th Psalm pushes the vision even wider. Again and again, the psalm says that creation itself depends on the breath of God. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and so you renew the face of the earth. Not just the disciples, not just the church, the whole earth. The Spirit is not tiny. It is not contained. It is not fragile. Not yours, and it's not mine either. The Spirit is wind over chaos, and breath in dry lungs, and fire in tired hearts, and life surging where everyone assumed only death remained. And perhaps that is part of what makes Pentecost both beautiful and unsettling. Because once the Spirit begins moving, walls become harder to maintain. Language barriers are crossed. Strangers become neighbors. Silence becomes testimony. Fear becomes courage. And prayers written privately on small paper doves suddenly become part of the shared heartbeat of a whole community. One of the prayers of the church, in one of those prayers we say, "May our prayers rise before you like incense." I love that image because incense drifts everywhere. It curls unpredictably. It fills spaces we didn't even realize were empty. Kind of like prayer. Kind of like the Spirit. Maybe that's what's happening here today. 160 prayers rising together. Some whispered, some desperate, some thankful, some barely holding together, and the Spirit gathers them all. The world often tells us prayer is weak or naive or passive or a crutch. But I don't think that's true. I think prayer is one of the bravest things human beings do. To pray is to admit, I can't carry this alone. I still believe love matters. I still believe hope is possible. I still believe someone is listening. And Pentecost is God's response to those prayers. Not silence, not abandonment, but breath, fire, wind, living water, the assurance that no voice is lost, no language is forgotten, no grief goes unheard. So today, as those doves fly above us, may we remember that they are not decorations. They are testimony. Testimony that the Spirit is still moving, still speaking, still listening, and still flowing through ordinary human hearts. Thanks be to God for that. Amen.